Welcome to the Building Heroes podcast, where we learn to build heroes in our homes to help our kids be prepared for their life journeys. Hi, I'm your host, Molly Christensen, and I love to encourage and mentor you on your path.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Building Heroes podcast. This is episode number 60, and today I'm excited to introduce you to Tandy Hogate, who is amazing. She is a mom, a homeschool mom of 4 kids. She's been married to her high school sweetheart for nearly 30 years. She has 2 grandkids and a commercial U-pick farm and a whole bunch of pets. She homeschooled her older kids all the way through high school, and now she's currently homeschooling her 5th grader. And she just has the best heart for homeschool moms who are just trying to do their best, but sometimes just don't have a clear vision of what they feel like they can do. And so she is launching a brand new ministry called Homeschool Hindsight, which pairs seasoned homeschool moms with ones who need encouragement, because my goodness, as a homeschool mom, it's a tough path. And we can always definitely use encouragement. So welcome, Tandy.
Thank you, Molly. I'm so glad to be here.
Well, thank you for being here. And I would love to hear more about your story and your journey and how you got to where you are, because I also forgot to mention that you live up in Alaska, which is super cool, like both ways.
It's literally very cool. So my husband and I were born and raised in a very small town in Crow. Actually, it was a town that my great grandparents they founded the town. So my roots ran pretty deep there. And my husband and I, we'd been married for, I don't know, maybe 10 years, close to 10 years. And things just happened, as sometimes does in life. And we found ourselves facing a move. We knew we needed to go somewhere. Just the job opportunities that my husband had weren't what they needed to be. So anyway, that's how we ended up in Alaska. So we came up here. We didn't know anyone. We went from a town where we all had deep roots and family everywhere, and family was kind of everything. And we ended up here where we knew absolutely no one, and we didn't know a soul. And it was definitely different. And we moved up in January, which it's dark and it's cold and you don't go outside, a lot. I mean, we weren't equipped to do any of the winter outside things. So, but it was good. I'm glad we're here. That was almost 20 years ago. So.
Wow. Very neat. So how did you start homeschooling then?
So
did Alaska play into that?
No, it didn't really. Who was one of my best friends. She and I had talked about it some when our kids were little, before they were even in school. And if it had been her, because I trusted, we were very close and I trusted her, I would have thought that it was just another weird idea. But because it came from her, we talked about it a lot more, and she was definitely homeschooling. She had already made her decision. And so I thought, well, let's try it. I mean, I really, really enjoyed just having my kids around, and just naturally in life, we'd done so much with just reading books, and, it just seemed like we could naturally maybe do this. So, and we did. There was a lot of bumps in the road, but we did.
Yeah. Tell me about it. So what were some of the bumps in the road? Yeah. Tell me about it.
Well, I think our family, though we have the neatest, just most gracious family, I'm sure my parents were very worried. They were like, oh no, what are you going to do? You're going to ruin these poor kids. But, so I'm sure that was part of it, though they were extremely supportive. But also that, I would say that's where kind of Alaska comes in, because, they had plenty of people. When we were living in Oregon, they had friends, we lived in a neighborhood. So we had, kids around, there was plenty of time and room for social interaction with family and stuff. And then, when we moved to Alaska, my greatest fear was we're going to end up like in the middle of nowhere and will never speak to another soul kind of thing, which was irrational, but I'd never been here. I didn't know anything about it. So it was kind of neat. We were attending a church in Oregon, and I just asked our pastor, I said, is there one of the same denomination in Alaska? And so he helped me research, and we found one that was actually in the town we were moving to. So when we went, our very first day at church, we ended up locking ourselves out of the house we were staying in, and we weren't going to be able to get a key for like 6 hours. And I left my purse at home. I had no money. We had no money. We were in a town we didn't know. We were in a church where we knew absolutely no one. And we had hours to kill, and it was January in Alaska. It was cold. So we were just gonna have to sit in our car essentially, or walk around Fred Meyer or something. And a gal came up and introduced herself, and she said, she just for some reason figured we must homeschool. We must look like homeschoolers. I don't know. And she said, she introduced herself, and they invited us for lunch for the afternoon. That was the coolest thing. So we didn't end up having to sit in our car for 5 hours waiting to get the key to get back into our house. But anyway, but we just kind of immediately then got plugged into the homeschool community in the church. And there were several families, and they're still some of our dearest friends, some of the people that we met at that church. We don't, anyway, so that was kind of a neat thing. And Alaska was different with homeschooling because it just offers so many amazing opportunities for kids, not necessarily for homeschool kids, but because our kids were homeschooled, they had more time to be able to do some of these things. Like our church actually bought an airplane because a lot of the ministry is bush ministry here. And so, then they let the kids be involved in building this plane all the way from, the mechanics of it to wrapping it in with the fabric. And my kids got to be involved in that. That's huge. What kids get to do stuff like that. So it was pretty neat. I feel like living up here has really given us gave us some incredible opportunities as homeschool family.
Wow, that is super cool. Like seriously, who gets to build a plane, And the thing is, I think sometimes we think as moms, oh, but I don't have any cool opportunities like that. But I think at the same time, if we open our minds, we'll start seeing them, and our minds and our eyes, and we'll start seeing them more than we think. So that's cool.
Totally. And I think it's important that we know what our kids love and seek out those opportunities. So the example that I share the most is my son, when he was 14 years old, he had worked quite a bit and had earned quite a bit of money. And he's asked us if he could please use the money that he had earned to buy an old truck and then spend. In Alaska, you can actually start driving at 14. You have to drive for 2 years. You can drive for 2 years with a permit before you get your license. So he said he wanted to get this truck and get it fixed up so that when he got his license at 16, he'd have a rig that was paid for and mechanically sound. But he had never done any real mechanic work before. But it was his money, and we decided that would be fine. So he, and the other thing is he's a go-getter, and he's a mover. Like he's a mobile kid. He needed to be challenged. We were struggling a little bit with him in school, and, there was attitude in there too, probably from both he and his mom. But I just knew like we were missing something. But I didn't know what. Like I just knew that have you ever been at where you just feel like, okay, this isn't our best. This isn't right, but I don't know how to fix it. So he asked to buy this truck, and we approved it. And he, school changed because he knew he couldn't do anything with a truck until his school was done. But also my idea of school changed in that instead of giving him work that was I knew that he was not college bound. I knew he wasn't a college bound kid. If anything, he was going to be headed to trade school. So it shifted my focus from him scoring well, like on his SATs and, trying to get him into a good college to what was he created for? What was he created to do? And I remember as a little kid, I'd watch him and I'd look at his hands and I thought, this kid is going to work with his hands. There was just something about that. So he bought the truck, and oh my goodness, he spent every penny and every minute with that truck. And he didn't just, it was ugly, which was surprising because he's kind of a flashy kid, but he ended up switching it from a automatic to a manual transmission. He rebuilt the engine. He, new wheels and tires and did stuff like that. He also built a paint room in our barn and painted the truck. My dad came and helped him with that. And it wasn't a solid color. It was red, white, and blue. And then my mom flew up and helped him with all the interior, and they redid the seats and they redid the the headboard or whatever is above you. And like the whole thing, it was amazing that there wasn't a piece of that truck that he didn't touch. And that made all the difference in his school. And some of the I gave him assignments like, he had to write about the whole process. He had to document the whole process. So he took pictures, he made a slideshow, he wrote a report. I made him keep account of his financials. So if he ever sold the truck, he'd know if he made money or if he lost money on it, which it didn't really matter. That wasn't the point of it, but it was math. And I was able to incorporate some real life math into these things. And he had to learn social skills as far like talking with people he didn't know. He had to talk to a lot of parts people. He had to learn to explain himself when he needed help with something. He had to learn research skills because he'd never done any mechanic work at all before. So that was pretty incredible. The really, really fun part of this story is that now he's 27 and he started like 5 years ago, he was working up on the North Slope in the oil fields. And it just wasn't the life for him. He had a wife and kid at home and he didn't like being gone 2 weeks out of every month. And so he started a performance diesel business. And now that's his sole income. It's a multi-million-dollar business. He has, I don't know, like 15, I think, employees, and it's incredible. And I just think back and I'm like, man, I am so glad we said yes to that truck. Because I really think that sent him on this trajectory to exactly what God had created him for.
I love that because, too often as homeschool moms, and I know I started out this way, and I think most homeschool moms do, you look at all the stuff that they have to learn before they leave high school. And I'm pretty sure refurbishing a truck's not on that list. But, and we start saying, oh, here's the checklist list. You need to know this, this, and this. And the problem is the kids start going, well, why do I have to know that? I don't care. Why do I have to know that? But mom is all stressed out because we want to make sure the kids get a good education. And we're like, because you have to, because I said so. And that just doesn't light them up. It just doesn't spark the spark. And and I love that you're pointing out too, it's like each kid has their own path. God created each child, each person for something amazing that can help other people. They have specific gifts and talents that they can work with. It doesn't mean we can't learn more things, but it's just like what you're saying. Yes. And when we can let go of that as homeschool moms, that is so valuable. Let go of the checklist is what I mean, not the spark.
Exactly.
The checklist is a nice place to start, but if it's not lighting up our kids, then that attitude thing comes in you're talking about with mom and kid.
So much so. And you can keep the checklist, but the box that you check doesn't have to look the same for every kid. I think that's important. Math was super important. He had to learn math. Just because he wasn't college bound doesn't mean I wanted to dumb down his education at all. As a matter of fact, he now owns a business. Think of the math that he has to do. Granted, he has accountants and all that stuff now, but when he first started this business, he had to do all of that himself and it had to add up. So in order to make it grow to the point that it's at today, he had to have all of those skills. He had to be able to write and communicate and add and subtract and all that.
For sure. And I'm not saying throw the checklist out. I'm just saying don't let it be your master. It should be there as a guide to help you, have ideas. What direction should we go? But really our biggest guide is looking at the kid. What lights them up? What gets them excited? I have a son that built me a shed when he was 16 because he was so excited to do it. Now, he doesn't own a business building sheds or anything yet, but he's still got time. He's younger. But yeah, I mean, like, think about what you have to learn in just doing these hands-on things. And I think sometimes too, especially for boys, we sit there and say, you have to sit here and do your book work. And they can benefit so much with just getting out and doing things with their hands. I kind of feel like a lot of the stuff in the public school system is geared more towards girls in a sense, because if we're going to stereotype, they have an easier time with that type of a system, sitting down and doing the book work and learning that way. And so as homeschoolers, it's really fantastic that we have that freedom, that, you know, they can still do the book work, but they can do it in their way. They can do it upside down if they want to. I have definitely had kids doing it that way, you know, they can do it however, but they don't have to, we don't have to be their taskmaster so much, because we can mix things up a lot more too, which is so great. So yeah, very freeing when you start to think outside of that box, those boxes, I guess, too. But I mean, I still like checklists. So yes.
Well, and the checklist is nice because it does serve as your guide. And I think that's important. You know, you just can't throw it all out, but, and some people do. I mean, I guess I know of a couple of unschoolers, you would call them. And I mean, I would have, when I first started homeschooling, if I would have heard of, you know, the idea of unschooling, I would have been like, that's weird and you're going to ruin your child. But now I've seen it be done beautifully. And it just, you know, I think when the parents are completely 100% engaged and they have a vision for where they're wanting to take their kids, I think that's so important, because if you know what you're trying to do, you're trying to just raise respectable kids who are going to work hard, be honest, and happy. You want them to grow up and be happy adults and well-adjusted. And, you know, you think of all the things, well, that starts super young, and it takes a lot of work to get that built up in them, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And that's exactly why I named my whole business Building Heroes Academy, is because that's what we want to do. We want to create that vision for them. We want to build them into the people they're meant to become. And, you know, sometimes I'm like, oh, it's building heroes, but I'm not trying to raise Superman who goes around saving people, right? You know, it's people who are willing to go on the hero's journey on their own path to become what they're meant to become, and to be, you know, the types of people that their parents would like them to be, which, you know, parents want their kids to be respectable and hardworking and happy and well-adjusted and all those other things you said, you know, with good character, right? That's what we want for our kids. And we want them to be a little bit better than us too, if not a lot better, but right? So, and I think that ties in really well with what we're talking about here with the checklist, you know, because sometimes we start trying to put our kids on the path that everybody says they have to go on. And that's stressful, because we're trying to make them go on a path that may or may not be theirs, you know?
Exactly. Yep.
So I love that. You mentioned that one thing that really helped you when you moved up to Alaska was your community. And I think that's huge for homeschoolers, because really, as homeschoolers, we're going on a journey too. And it can be very lonely sometimes. I think the internet has probably helped a lot with connecting people, but at the same time, I think it's disconnected people too, because sometimes maybe we rely on it too much and we don't get together in person. But you want to talk a little bit more about how community has helped you in your homeschool journey and how you find community? What, you know, what does that look like for you?
Yeah. So homeschooling, as a homeschool mom, it can be a very lonely experience, because you're just immersed in your family. From the time you get up until the time you go to bed, you are immersed in these humans that you're raising, and likely your husband, and, you know, your circle is very small. And it does take every minute of every day, it feels like. And especially, I mean, you have seasons where it feels like it's all consuming, just to keep everyone, you know, on track or moving forward. And, but it's funny, every single time I see one of the memes that talks about socialization with homeschool kids, and I'm always like, oh, but the moms need socialization too. Don't forget that. So I think finding community that kind of gets you, whatever that community is so very important, because you're going to need encouragement too. So for me, we, of course, we're small town people. So we moved from our small town in Oregon to a small town in Alaska. And, I mean, there was a homeschool community, but it was pretty scattered. So when my kids were, two were in junior high, and I think my daughter was starting high school, I think is when we went about this. It's been a while, so I don't remember the exact details, but I was talking, I hate teaching science. I just don't like it. And so when I teach science, I'm the worst science teacher ever. Like when I see experiments, I'm like, oh, please, can we skip that part? We're going to make a mess. I have to go buy all the stuff for this. And then it's just going to get thrown away. Like, we're going to make a mess. We're going to waste time. We're going to waste money. Like, this is pointless. But of course it isn't, just because I'm a horrible science teacher. So I was talking to a friend at church, and she said, well, she loved teaching science. So she said, well, maybe you and I could get together, and maybe you could teach something to my kids and I could teach science to your kids. Well, the idea blossomed, and we ended up starting a homeschool co-op that, while I was still director, I think we had 50 some families involved, which it doesn't seem huge, but it is huge when we're in a tiny town. We had people driving over an hour just to come to our co-op. And so, but as a co-op leader, I had a vision for exactly what I wanted. We offered academics, and the academics part of it was important, but more important was the connection, the community building. And when you think of like the awkward teenage years, they're just hard for kids. I mean, if you look back, I just saw a friend of mine posted the other day. She said, it's a girl I went to high school with, and she said, I don't think there's enough money in the world to pay me to go back to high school. But the point of her post was, your kids are there right now. If that's how you feel about it, then think about what they're going through right now. And I had never considered it from that perspective, but that was kind of the idea that I had then was, how can I give my kids an awesome high school experience without putting them out, that's in a controlled environment. So we started this co-op, and it worked really well, but it wasn't for everyone. So I think it's important when people, like I had friends who would say, I'm sorry, we're going to go do classical conversations. And I'd be like, good, go do classical conversations, because we weren't offering that highly structured classical education. Ours was much more about character building. And we did have some academics, but we tried to kind of balance it all. And so I think that finding where you fit, where your kids fit, and if you can't find it, build it. If you build it, they will come, right?
So true.
Yeah. So, but it's super important to be either, whether it be a small community or a big community, it's kind of whatever you need, but you need to be with people who are real and authentic, who understand the highs and lows of homeschooling. And one other thing, this is kind of to change the subject a little bit, but I think it's so important. And the older I get, the more I look back and see the importance of, I remember when my kids were younger, and I'd look at people like with teenagers, and they'd be kind of acting out, and I'd be like, well, thankfully I'm homeschooling. My kids are never going to do that. And guess what? They did. All of those sins that I judged other parents for that their kids were doing, my kids thought that they would do it too. I just think I think being authentic and raw and real, and then also not judging other parents and letting them be authentic and raw and real, and letting the mess in the background show up. And because we need each other, but we don't need each other on a superficial level. We need each other on a genuine, we're just trying to make it through the day and make the best decisions possible for our kids. And sometimes it's confusing, and it's hard, and it's frustrating. And sometimes it doesn't feel like you're getting anywhere, and it feels like your kids hate you, and your husband hates you, and everybody hates you. I just think I can't stress enough how important community, a real authentic community, is, whatever that looks like for each person.
Yeah, I love that so much. And you're totally right. Like, some people love co-ops or a certain type of co-op or whatever, and other people don't. And that's okay too. But I think just having the community is so, so important, because you're right too. When we're homeschool moms, we tend to get fully immersed in our own families, right? And sometimes, I don't know about you, but when I am in the house for too long, I start noticing all the problems, and it starts weighing down on me. And if you don't get out and you don't connect with other people, sometimes you forget that life is good. There's a lot of good people, a lot of good things out there. And you can just kind of get stuck in the muck, like literally. And we really were never meant to go on this journey alone. It was never meant to do that. And I think it's extra hard for homeschool moms because we're such DIYers, right? I mean, like, look, we're homeschooling. We even took that on too, right? We think we can do everything, which we probably could, just not at the same time. But, we do still need each other for sure. So one thing that I really love about what you're doing is that you've been through this, you've been there, done that. And one of the greatest desires of your heart is to help other homeschool moms, because it's a hard path and we do need each other. So can you just talk to us for a minute or two about how can we best support other homeschool moms? How do we do that? You've alluded to it a little bit here, but let's go into that a little more.
So I remember, when my oldest when I was potty training my oldest, and bless her heart, she was probably 2.5, and I was putting so much pressure on potty training, because you know how that is, like when you have a toddler, everybody else with toddlers is saying, well, my toddler was potty trained at 3 months old, and they've started college at 5 or whatever, it's it feels that way, and you're like, oh my gosh, I can never measure up, hurry, potty train. And a friend of mine came up to me and she put her arm around me and she whispered in my ear and she said, no child has ever shown college in a diaper. And it was so freeing to me to think, wait a minute, why am I so stressed at 2 or 2.5 that she's not potty trained? She's not ready. And I was taking I sucked. I'm kind of a joy kill anyway when I get intense on something. And so I was just sucking all the joy out of everything because she had to potty train. And it just was so freeing to hear. So then I've kind of used that in all of our phases of life. My son, who now owns that I was talking about before, that owns the really big business, he's dyslexic. And so he didn't read till he was almost 10. But I also I knew he was a sharp kid. And so I knew that I didn't realize he was dyslexic, but I knew that he was going to be able to read. And I just had that confidence in him. And though I was worried, why can't he read? Why is this so hard? I just kept thinking, okay, he will be able to read. He's not going to show up at college because, he was young. So I didn't know he wasn't college bound at the time, but he's not going to show up at college and not be able to read. We will get this. And, we were constantly making strides forward. And then, of course, once we figured out that he had dyslexia, we changed things up and, he's awesome. So, but as far remembering in order to encourage other homeschool moms is to put yourself kind of in their shoes and either to remember what it's like or to imagine what it's like. Like you're not always going to be one step ahead of the person that you're with. But if instead of judging or, like I said, I spent a lot of years saying, oh, I'm so glad we homeschool so my kids will never have to struggle with that. And they did. The world is around us and there's tough stuff that everybody has to walk through, and kids are kids and they don't always have their brain turned on. So it just is true. And so I really think, again, digging into that authenticity and majoring on the majors and remembering that the minors are really just minor things. There's a lot of pressure to teach your kids to read, to potty train your kids. And especially if they are college bound, you do have a list of hoops that you have to jump through and you have to do these things. But when you remember the vision of where you're taking them. So when a parent is struggling with whatever season that their kids are in, when they just have someone who will listen, and if you've been through it, you can have offer the advice that you have. But if you haven't, just by putting yourself in their shoes and trying to understand just how hard it would be, but allowing the authenticity. I have a good friend who she just isn't a good housekeeper. She just isn't. I don't even notice when I go to her house. I mean, I say that delicately because I would never want her to say, oh, that was rude. But you have to understand that I would rather be at her house than anyone else's. And I don't care if I have to move laundry over to sit on the couch because, oh my gosh, I feel so loved when I'm there. Like I would rather move her laundry over and feel loved than walk into a pristine house and it's the same with authenticity. I think if you can't share the hard stuff and if you can't walk through it together and, walk and help each other through it, pull each other out of the mud when you need to, then, it's just kind of pointless. I think, you need to be able to connect in that way. So if we don't have to have our perfectly polished lives, at all. And I just think it's really important to remember that.
Yeah, I love that so much because, as homeschool moms, we are all going on the same journey. We're all on our own journeys, but it is kind of the same journey, and we need allies.
Mm-hmm.
We need those people who can remind us of our vision, who can remember what it was like or imagine what it was like. I love that because, we don't always remember. Sometimes we have to imagine if we haven't gone through that before, and just not judging each other. It's like we really just, when we can encourage and provide hope and, that sort of thing for other homeschool moms, what it does is, yes, it uplifts those homeschool moms around us. And it doesn't mean we have to be like way far down the path on the homeschool journey. We can do this even if you just barely started. We can help encourage those around us. But I've noticed that when I take the opportunity to encourage those around me who are on this homeschooling journey too, it reminds me of my vision too. And it reminds me that I can still keep going on this path too. I mean, we've both been doing this for like 20 whatever years, but we're still going too, because you have a fifth grader. I have a fifth grader too. I actually just forgot she's in fifth grade. Yes. But we still have some years ahead of us too. And, while my days are a lot easier now, just because of things I have learned, I still have hard days too, And so it is wonderful when we can do that for each other, when we can bring hope and encouragement, because it is not the easy road to pick to homeschool. It is definitely not, but it's so, so worth it. So worth it, I think, in every sense of the word. All right. Well, Tandy, thank you so much for hopping on this podcast and helping us just to remember to encourage those around us, and that it is a journey, but man, it's so fun. If you were talking to a homeschool mom who was just feeling the overwhelm, we've all been there, and just feeling like, I can't do this, I'm going to send the kids back to school. What words of advice would you give to her?
Oh, man. I think it's a little bit situational, but the basic advice that I would give is stop teaching altogether. And we did that several times. I have a friend who calls it, I don't know if this would be, I forget, deschooling. And I know, I don't know if that's what she would call it if it was done over and over, but I just call it like a refreshment time. And I think sometimes it's important just to put the books away and to realize, to get back to the heart of your kids, look them in the eye, hear what their concerns are. Like, not only put school away, but don't talk, which is the hardest thing for me, because I want to solve everyone's problems all the time, especially my kids. Like, I don't like it when they're struggling. I want to solve it. I want to fix it. I want to move on because I want them happy, but that isn't what they need. So, and we did this several times, and it was kind of clunky at first. And, but over time I'd get better at just relaxing and letting that. And sometimes it would be because it's like I had two families. I have my older set, and then I have my daughter. So with the older kids, sometimes it'd be with all three of them that we just stop school, and we might stop for a week or two. And believe me, I would know in the back of my head that, oh my gosh, this means we're going to have math added on at the end of the year or something. Like, I knew, I was well aware of the consequences, but I also was aware of the consequences if we didn't. And when I was at my wit's end and when they were at their wit's end and we were just butting heads constantly, then something was desperately wrong and we had to find out what the problem was. So then as the noise got louder, I knew we had to fix it. It's just like with your car. If your car's making noise, you don't keep driving it and pushing it. You will stop and find out, when you're thunk, 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 when you realize you have a flat tire, you don't just keep driving. You stop, you figure out what the problem is, you fix the problem, and then you get back on the road or, whatever. But, your kids are little human, precious souls. And if you don't take the time to build the relationship with them at all times when they're young, then, you won't have that relationship when they're older.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, really good advice. And I mean, sometimes, moms and kids will butt heads, but that is the opportunity to learn and grow, to figure out how to build that relationship. And,
totally.
And even if you didn't build the relationship when they were younger, it is never too late. Never too late. It just makes it easier, but never too late. So that's good because, sometimes it's okay to just give yourself permission to stop and breathe. The world's not going to fall apart if you don't do all the things, even though sometimes it seems that way because you're the mom.
It does put all that pressure on yourself to make sure that gets done.
Yeah. So we're going to give you permission. You can breathe. You can adjust and halt the overwhelm and just look and see why that's happening, and that's a really good time to just stop, refresh, readjust, and you're going to have a growing opportunity. And it may not be the lesson that you had planned on the checklist, but that's the beautiful thing about homeschooling is that we can see those lessons more clearly because they're right in our face. So
that's exactly right.
All right. Well, Tandy, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it. If people did want to reach out to you and find you, or contact you, I guess is what I'm trying to say, how could they do that?
Probably the easiest way to find me right now is on Facebook, just under my regular profile, Tandy Hogate. We do have Homeschool Hindsight that we're in the process of launching, but it's an absolute tiny baby. So it's really not, it would probably be really hard to find. So I would love to connect with other homeschoolers on Facebook. It just, especially anybody that has questions about homeschooling or feels like they're in the mud or, I understand we've been in all sorts of mud. So, and we made it out alive by the skin of our teeth sometimes, but we made it out.
Well, that is awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on.
Thank you so much for having me, Molly. This was really fun.
Yes. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Building Heroes podcast. Can you help more people join the Building Heroes movement by sharing this podcast? More people can find it when you subscribe to the show, rate it, and leave a review. For more help on building heroes in your home, get the free Building Heroes resources at www.buildingheroesacademy.com.